Good morning, everyone. My name is Margaret Hinkle. I chair the Post Commission. Welcome to those in attendance at the meeting. We appreciate the members of the public who are attending the meeting. This is our 43rd public meeting. And let me begin. I call the meeting to order. And I want to go through the list of the commissioners who are in attendance. Commissioner Baker?
Here.
Commissioner Bluestone?
I'm here.
Commissioner Calderon?
I'm here. Good morning, all.
Commissioner Ellison?
Good morning, President.
Commissioner Hall?
Good morning, present.
Commissioner Kazarosian?
Present, good morning.
Commissioner Luma?
Good morning, present.
And Commissioner Talley.
Good morning, present.
All of the commissioners are present. We obviously have a forum. Let me turn to the next item on the agenda, namely the approval of the minutes of our September 14th, 2023 meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, please, Commissioner Talley.
All right, so on the public meeting notes on page 9, where it talks about the credentials for law enforcement officers with post-certification, it was mentioned that there was a proposal that included an estimated cost of $80,000 to $100,000 annually. So should we also reflect what that number represented in regard to the cost? Like, was it an administrative cost? Was it associated with purchasing something?
We could reflect that, Commissioner. There was a memo as part of the packet where that is explained to some degree, and we could easily reflect that in the minutes if you choose.
Okay.
And did you have another question also, Commissioner Talley, with regard to the minutes?
No, I am complete. The other was for the executive session.
Thank you. So there's been a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion with regard to the minutes? If not, Commissioner Baker?
Approve.
Commissioner Bluestone?
I approve.
Commissioner Calderon?
Yes, I approve.
Commissioner Ellison?
I'm a yes.
Commissioner Hall?
I approve.
Commissioner Kazarosian?
Approve.
Commissioner Luma?
Approved.
Commissioner Talley?
Approve.
I also approve. Minutes are unanimously approved. Let us turn now to our executive director report. Enrique, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, commissioners. I will be sharing my screen in a couple of minutes to go through an executive director report. I'll be providing a certification update from the last efforts to date, as well as a disciplinary records update. And towards the end of that presentation, I'll turn it over to Eric Pradas, our Chief Financial Officer, to go through a finance update. We have a somewhat light public portion of the agenda of the meeting today, but we have a full agenda for the executive session, and I'll share my screen momentarily. So as I mentioned, I'll go over the certification update, a disciplinary records discussion, and then I hope to get some feedback from the commissioners, and Eric will go through a finance and administrative update. This slide shows commissioners that according to our records, there are no pending submissions from agencies, and similarly, there are no individuals with pending submission for the recertification effort of all individuals with last names I through P. As you can see from the slide, this was the case last month when I last provided a recertification update. and this continues to be the case. The total individuals to be recertified as part of this process continues to stand at 5,645 individuals. This slide again represents the progress for the recertification effort. Also the progress over the last 3 months, really. We continue to highlight the relative number of individuals in a category other than certified or conditionally certified as a very small number. This is an aggregate of approximately 3%. The majority of officers are in compliance with the certification requirements or are missing technical requirements. This number stays at an aggregate of 96.9%. I will note that those individuals in the conditionally certified category are missing technical requirements, and this category typically includes individuals who have attended the Bridge Academy and have yet to complete the work requirement, a requirement they can do over a period of years. I will also note that Post has sent all 5,645 letters outlining the certification status of these individuals, and will continue in the next few weeks to process those changes to the conditionally certified individuals, for those with technical exceptions. This is an ongoing process. That's all to say that Post has a high degree of confidence that officers in these categories have been verified for compliance with the certification requirements, including in-service training with information provided from the NPTC. There's a high level of coordination and data sharing with the NPTC to make sure that all of these requirements are met. In addition to the numbers in this slide, the certification team has processed approximately 867 individual officers, and those are graduates from academies with last names A through C. There's an ongoing effort that happens, really every month, relative to those who graduate from academies throughout the year. I will also just mention that the certification team and the legal team have been working on preparing to process the certifications of SROs, school resource officers, and we plan on providing an update on this process at the upcoming meeting, the meeting in November. Finally, from the previous slide, all of the details of these officers will be published in our November 1st release of data. I will move on to an update and discussion on the disciplinary records. The 5 categories listed in this slide represent a large portion of the requests we have received for changing certain disciplinary records. I will provide details and explain the proposed approach for each one of these in the next slides. In the first instance, we have documented verbal reprimands that are eligible to be expunged or vacated after some period of time. There are also letters of counseling. Sometimes they're referred to as letters of counseling. There's similar terminology. Secondly, there are a few cases, these are very few, where the discipline imposed occurred while someone was not a law enforcement officer. Again, I'll be providing an update as to the approach. There are claims in other instances that certain information should not have been reported or does not constitute discipline. We also have some requests to change or modify the description of category previously submitted. And finally, we will also be discussing instances in which an individual retired since these records were submitted to Post, and that's the final category represented here. I will be discussing the first four categories, as I mentioned in the next few slides, and General Counsel Randy Ravitz will be discussing a proposed policy for relinquishing certification as part of the legal update. This was a discussion that occurred at the last commission meeting. Okay, so on the first instance, where there are there is documented discipline that is expunged, vacated, or reversed. According to the regulation outlined in this slide, 806 4B1J, and these are the dissemination of information regulations. Information that has been vacated or reversed will not be part of the public database. We understand that certain letters of counseling or other documented verbal reprimands are eligible to be expunged or removed from the officer's files. This happens typically after some period of time. In the case of the Massachusetts State Police, the rule is that the individual officer has to request that those letters be vacated or removed, and that removal is only eligible to be removed after 1 year. So they, at a minimum, stay in the officer's file for a year. By the way, where there is no request, the letter remains in the officer's file. So essentially, we are interpreting that removal would be equivalent to vacated as outlined in the regulation. And as such, our intention is to communicate with agencies that we will require an affirmative confirmation that the letter of counseling has been removed or the decision reversed prior to removing it from the public database. Once we get that confirmation, we will remove it from the public database. I will make sure I make a pause at the beginning of my presentation and can go back to discuss any of these instances if the commissioners would so choose. Secondly, the second type of request for changes or updates are instances where the discipline occurred at a time when the individual was not a sworn law enforcement officer. There are only a couple of instances in this category, but I do believe that it merits discussion. Like in this last slide, the regulation is highlighted in italics and refers to the officer in both instances. And the term officer or law enforcement officer is further defined in the statute and the regulations. So as such, we recommend that these instances be removed from the database because the term refers to an officer as opposed to an individual. I will now note that there are mechanisms to discipline dispatchers or student candidates, for example. A student candidate attending an academy may be dismissed from that academy for certain misconduct, and that's a process that Post is not involved in. We certify them once completion of the academy has occurred, and therefore the discipline ensuing afterwards is part of what should be reported to Post. Commissioner Newman, I see you have a question or comment.
Yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to finish first before taking questions. I was just putting my hand up.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to just finish this slide and take your question. I think it will be a good discussion. So as I mentioned, there's mechanisms to discipline individuals that are not part of law enforcement. There are a number of individuals that have been deemed by Post to not be within scope, as they don't meet the definition of law enforcement officer, and commissioners will remember that's been a healthy discussion in the past. And thus the discipline where it may have occurred while serving as a non-law enforcement officer is something that we also believe should be excluded from the public database. Again, I will mention this is only a handful of cases, but it merited, in my opinion, a discussion with the commissioners. Commissioner Luma, do you want to?
Yeah, I have two questions. Thank you. So do you ever foresee a situation where a request for removal is made prior to the discipline being published in the database?
Yeah, so, and I'll get into this, I was planning on getting to this a little bit later in the presentation, but
Okay.
let me mention it now. We will roll out a portal where the information will be submitted in real time. We'll first get the complaint, we will later get the results of the investigation, and we will later get the disposition. So there's going to be a lot of data exchange and data updating in real time as we process information that's submitted to us. And, our intention and the regulations provide for that. While something is pending, this will not be part of the public database. So a lot of the back and forth that will occur by definition on pending investigations, pending dispositions, etc. We have to we'll have to get the capacity to not show in the database where it's relevant.
Thank you.
And that's really the planned approach.
All right, that was one of my other question. Well, part two of my other question, what happens if a request is pending? But also, is there a process for the commission to be notified when an officer actually has made a request for removal, or are we waiting until we get the outcome of that request?
There is a process in the regulations to essentially appeal to a determination made by me via the staff. They could request a change. We were required to respond in some capacity with in writing with a determination, and where the determination is one, where the officer still wants to appeal that. There will be a mechanism. There's a mechanism to bring to elevate it from the executive director.
Well, no, I know that there's a mechanism for us per se, but I was wondering, like, say with the state police, an officer has, you just said they have like about a year to make a post-year to make that request. So the officer, I imagine, would initially make the request with their agency.
Yes.
Prior to us, right? And so I'm wondering if the request is made at the same time with the agency and the post commission, or are we waiting for determination by the agency before that individual can appeal with us? I don't know if that makes sense.
The latter, yeah, it makes sense. The latter, Commissioner. And let me, in other words, we deal with agencies in this regard. Our leverage and authority resides with agencies. They submit information as they make determinations, where they make corrections. We also look to them to provide documentation that was the case, so that we can have it in our records, etc. In the case of the letters of counseling with the state police, that we are following essentially we're deferential to the local process, which is the policies of the state police, which is the 1 year eligibility to be removed. And so when they tell us that they have removed it from the officer's file, we'll do the same because of that procedure.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bluestone, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Since you just raised the issue of the letters of counseling again, my question about that is, what is the and not necessarily for this discussion, but just as a kind of general issue to consider, what is the definition of a letter of counseling? And I would propose that if this is something that we're working on defining, that we consider that a counselor who's licensed, because that would mean that individual has some stake in the result. And then my other question would be, what are it says letters of counseling or similar. And could you just clarify for me, please, what similar is referring to?
Yeah, there are, I'll start with the second question first, Commissioner. There are instances in which there's a policy, there's simply a local policy to document a verbal reprimand they don't call it a letter of counseling necessarily. And there's a process again to remove that from the officer's file. Relative to your first question, the letter of counseling is a term of art from the state police, and it's essentially documenting a verbal reprimand. This does not refer to
Okay.
to the kind of psychological counseling or whatnot. It comes unilaterally. It's not seen as the officer has no recourse in terms of appealing, for example, and it's a way to document what effectively is a verbal reprimand, a supervisory type of thing. Because of that, it goes away. It's eligible to be removed from the officer's file after 1 year. Again, some people don't request that, and it stays. I think the idea is that, well, I don't think, I know the idea is that if there's a second instance of a similar, misconduct, and the letter of counseling is in the officer's file, it gets elevated to, a documented written reprimand of some kind, or it could be now a discipline of some kind. That's the idea between of the 1 year.
Okay, I appreciate you clarifying that, because I misunderstood that clearly, and I think it's very misleading to call it a letter of counseling when there's not, in fact, any kind of intervention that's occurring. It's just feedback. So I'm wondering then if we can change the language.
Yeah, we don't have to refer to that. This is a term of the state police, but it is essentially a documented verbal reprimand. It comes from a supervisory capacity, nothing else.
Thank you.
So Commissioner Allison, you had your hand next.
Yes, thank you, Enrique. A quick follow-up on, on the claims that when they were not officer. I'm assuming, and I shouldn't assume, but that is this prior employment that these claims when they were not a police officer?
Yes, there's instances, again, not that very many, but where somebody comes into the department as a dispatcher or in another non-sworn capacity, some kind of administrative capacity. There's instances in which people get disciplined in similar ways, with a written reprimand of some kind, with a suspension perhaps. And it just so happens that there's certain records that were submitted to us when that reflect behavior or discipline when they were not sworn officers. And again, we're taking the position that because we've always referred to officers, not individuals, that and this is an officer disciplinary record effort, that those instances should not be part of the database.
And my other question is, does this apply to a recruit officer? Because I think there's some gray area there. And are these reported to the post? For instance, if a recruit officer gets into an issue while in the academy, and even though their department may find that problem not be problematic, are they required to send those to the post? Because the post does certify them prior to them leaving so are they considered officers even though they're in the academy? And are they under the same rules of the post if they get into issues in the academy, because they do arise?
Yeah, that was the other example, recruit, or let's say, what was the term I used? Just academy, student officer. Those, when they are in the academy, there's a mechanism for discipline, as part of that. They're technically not certified until they complete the academy. And thus, I am also proposing that where there's behavior that's discipline or during that time frame, that does not be part of the database. I will note that the most egregious behavior of somebody attending an academy is that they will be expelled from the academy and not allowed to come back. And in those instances, the person is never certified.
But
officer.
And not to interrupt you, but that may not always be the case because again, this is where the oversight of the post, I know sometimes if folks know the right people, it may go away. And I'm concerned that that is not reported to the post for at least for review of every officer. If there is some disciplinary action while they're in the academy, that should be reported to the post because they fall under the purview and not just the academy deciding whether or not that behavior rises to that level.
Yeah, report. So there's two different things I should note, Commissioner. That reporting to post and reflecting it into the public database are two different things essentially. We do get you commissioners will remember a couple of meetings ago I reported that there's some allegations about some cheating on the exam on one of the academies. We're coordinating with the MPTC, etc. We get all that information. We have coordinate those efforts. But where there's again, our position is where there's discipline that's imposed when somebody's a student officer, we feel that that it should not be reported in the public database. Now, if commissioners feel differently and interpret that an officer begins to be the term officer, as in the regulation, applies when somebody is going through the academy, we could have that discussion and address it accordingly. Is that, well, Commissioner Baker, did you have a question or comment?
I did, just a couple. I had a follow-up on the student officers as well. So you're saying you don't deem a student officer an officer until they actually graduate?
Correct.
I just want to make sure I have that correct.
That's correct.
And secondly, and I think you just cleared this up, if there is some discipline, it's still going to get reported to post, even though you're not deeming them an officer.
In many instances, they do. That's right. It gets reported to post. What we're discussing as part of this discussion is whether as to publishing that information.
Gotcha. Okay, and the last one is back to the letters of counseling. I just wanted to reiterate something I reiterated before. Not everyone's policy reads the same with regards to discipline. In some agencies, letters of counsel, I believe we're on the same page. It's basically a conversation that's documented. It's not necessarily discipline. So in some agencies, there's not the wording of remove that for a year. It's just simply not discipline. It's a conversation with your employee. So are those agencies, going to be able to also, be able to appeal to the post commission that, this wasn't a form of discipline. This was a conversation.
Absolutely. In real time, when we get to the actual ongoing reportable instances, this in many ways would be an instance not reportable to post. Okay. What we're dealing with here, Commissioner, is instances that have already been reported. They have already been made public, and we feel it's important to discuss with you and let the public see our approach towards removing some of those instances.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Ellison, do you feel we covered your point?
It did, but I'm still a little uncomfortable with it because I know things don't always get reported equally, and that is my concern. That if we're not getting that information on all the officers, and it's not required, that we may have things slipping through the cracks, and especially in that early infancy of an officer's time becoming a police officer, if there are issues that arise and should be flagged early on, I think that's critical. If there are issues in the academy,
we could revisit, this position, with where we have previously interpret law enforcement officer as in scope or for the definition of being in scope or not. I do, you raise a larger issue, Commissioner, relative to how things get reported to us by so many agencies that we deal with. The reality of this information that we're receiving is that discipline is also administered differently throughout some of these agencies, and it's something that in the longer term or maybe medium term we plan to address at the agency certification level with forthcoming regulations relative to auditing and maintenance of records, which our legal team has already begun to talk about, to consider or think about for future discussion at commission meetings.
I don't. Yeah, no, I'm saying I don't see it that difficult because most of like the smaller police agencies don't have their own academy, so they're being serviced by larger ones. So there probably aren't that many academies where this information wouldn't be readily available by recruits. For instance, Boston trains a lot of other departments because they don't have their own facility, they don't have their own academy. So those records would be easy to get from other smaller towns, from some of the larger agencies like the state police. And Boston Transit has their own academy, but most of the smaller ones don't. I just am very concerned that things would slip through the crack early on that should have been flagged.
Well, on that note, Commissioner, let me suggest that we could pause or not act on these number 2 recommendation, and come back at the next commission meeting with a proposal to ensure that your concerns are addressed.
I'd be comfortable with that, and I'd be more than happy to work with you on that.
Okay. Sounds good. So let me, if there's no further questions, and I don't see any, let me move on to the third instance of disciplinary records, and that is where claims we have gotten, again, these are not that very many, but they fall in this one category. We have a number of requests or claims that discipline that was reported to us and is now part of the public database should not have been reported to us or does not constitute discipline. I will mention that we are generally very skeptical about these requests. We are, we'll look at the regulations and how we have made and provided a lot of guidance relative to minor matters, what constitutes minor matters and what does not, and we will be applying those instances on a case-by-case basis in each of these requests. Commissioners will remember that we just issued additional guidance on matters that are reportable to post. It's on our website. This is guidance to law enforcement agencies regarding 555 CMR 1.00 and 6.00. These are the regulations that deal with all kinds of complaints and investigations following those complaints. The guidance includes a section that further clarifies minor and non-minor matters. Section 8E of the statute stipulates that the Division of Police Standards shall maintain a public database containing information related to an officer's agency imposed discipline. So where there was agencies imposed discipline, our default is that it should be part of the database. The statute elsewhere classifies retraining, for example, as a form of discipline that the commission can impose. We have gotten a request that all matters relative to retraining should not be part of the database. Again, our position is that it is meant to be part of the public database. So again, for these reasons, we're skeptical about eliminating from the public database matters that where an officer, a sworn officer, has indeed received discipline. Having said that, we will analyze these requests through the lens of the statute, the regulations, and the recent guidance, and modify if we feel it's necessary. However, of course, if the discipline has been vacated or reversed, it gets eliminated from the public database under a different section of the dissemination of regulation of information regulations, the one I spoke about in the last couple of slides, or 2 slides ago. Oh, Commissioner Bluestein, you have another question?
I just wanted to raise a quick point, and I'm just thinking that as you describe this, that we sort of probably face the struggle of balancing a false positive and a false negative, and just that as we think about these issues, that we consider, you know, the potential that we might inadvertently raise the bar for discipline overall, and to just be mindful of that. That if we include too many disciplinary issues that are minor, that we may sort of raise the bar across the Commonwealth. That's just a point I wanted to make.
Yeah, yeah, Commissioner, that's right. We have anecdotal, but powerfully anecdotal evidence that since we started this notion of minor matters that are not reportable to post, which the statute speaks about, that agencies have questions and they sometimes simply decide, you know what, I don't wanna risk it. I'm just gonna over-report to post. I'm not gonna try to differentiate whether something is minor and then find out that it wasn't necessarily in post's eyes, so I'm gonna over-report. Interestingly, the dissemination of these records from last month, you know, could also have other dynamics. Maybe people will reconsider that approach, or maybe they will continue with that because they see peers, other departments doing so. So it's just going to be an ongoing effort. We've gotten, for example, questions about something that they don't report because they think it's a minor matter or is not credible. That's the other threshold type of word, the key word here, where they think that there's a complaint that's not credible. They don't report it. If they later are, for example, suits in a civil manner, you know, or there's a complaint, you know, against another agency, for example, with another agency like M.G.L, and they now have to respond. They feel that, you know, are they now in trouble with post because they didn't submit it to us in the first instance? This is a key question I had from the chiefs at the time that I attended. We'll just have to be flexible for instances like this and allow that, you know, it's never too late to submit something, even if you did not submit it to us, and understand that there's implications in very different ways. Okay, so I think I was done with this slide. If there's no further questions, I'll move on to the fourth and final category that I will be addressing, and that is requests to modify a category that was previously selected or modify the description that was previously reported. As a general matter, we also understand that where there's information that should be added or edited to make sure that that the events are better reflected, we will do that. But we don't want to get in a situation where we are changing descriptions or categories with the ultimate result, whether it's intended or not, to eliminate or obfuscate the description of a particular record. For example, we'll be reluctant to use categories, generic categories like other. We feel that it's better to add information that may provide additional context. That's totally fair game. We're also starting to implement an approach where we will put in what the agency reports as being the correction. And I think I have over here, I have a particular example that is a good way to illustrate. There are instances where maybe there was an original complaint, or the initial complaint came in as bias. All of those complaints are reportable to post. There's no exception on minor matters for complaints related to bias. It is in many instances, maybe or in some instances, the officer may have been the finding may have been that the officer did not act in a way that it was a biased manner, but maybe it was disciplined for violating policy. Our approach on instances like this, and there's not very many, but it's a good example, is to provide an add context as opposed to eliminate the nature of the initial complaint. And we, for example, say that there was no finding of bias, but there was a discipline for violating policy. Again, in general, our preference is to add information as opposed to deleting or eliminating. I'll just have a couple more slides relative to the ongoing efforts on the disciplinary records. We had initially, as of last month, we had initially planned on doing 2 more releases. Let me first mention, we have our initial release was of August 22nd. We made some updates in September 1st and September 15th. We felt we addressed a lot of the requests for corrections that came in there. We had initially planned for 2 more releases, one in November and one in December, for an approximate aggregate of about just under 1,000 more records. Just given all the effort of studying these records and comparing them to what we had reported to us initially and reported out, we are now looking to combine these 2 releases in the next coming weeks, and we will go back to agencies as part of this process, making sure that before we publish any additional records, they have been shared with all those individual agencies where there's records to be published, and double check that we have the latest possible information. That way, we will only go to agencies once. We'll communicate with the chiefs associations and communicate individually with each of the departments and the chiefs where there's information that will be added pertaining to the department. I'll move on to 2 additional elements, or the 2 projects that really follow the historical disciplinary records, or the disciplinary records effort. There are, first, there's the project relative to records that Post has received after January 31st of this year, and that have continued to flow into the general mailbox, but are not included in the historical disciplinary spreadsheets. Commissioners will remember that the spreadsheets that all the information that we have released has of date of January 31st of this year. So the way to deal with these records is that we will partially populate them into our portal, a portal that we will roll out in the coming weeks. This information will be populated by some in our staff, programmatically and manually. These records will be, again, the idea is that these records will be available to agencies once the rollout of the complaint portal is effective. And there will be some needed updates to those records. For example, the results of the investigations or the dispositions. That will be done via the portal. The rollout of the complaint portal is itself the second project. We are now envisioning that to happen for early December. Complaints that agencies receive after the rollout will be exclusively entered by agencies into that portal. and we will, at the time, of course, phase out the general mailbox. Agencies will be required to update those records in real time. And of course, the portal is designed to keep track of the submission dates and where the update has been done or not done. The staff at Post will have the mechanism to track dates that are past due in terms of reports due to Post, and be able to manage these in real time in a much more efficient way. For example, IA investigations are required to be completed within 90 days of submitting a complaint to Post, or request an extension from the Division of Standards. We will have aging reports as part of this portal to make sure that we're managing all of that information, again, efficiently in real time. This was my planned update for the disciplinary records. I can make a pause now if there's additional questions or comments from commissioners on this effort before I turn it over to Eric for a brief update on finance. Being none, Eric, do you want to? I can continue driving the presentation, and you can speak to it, if that's okay.
Yes, if you wouldn't mind, Enrique, that'd be great.
Okay, please go ahead.
All right, just a few slides on for a financial and administrative update. Just a quick reminder: the books of the Commonwealth officially close at the end of this month, and that is for FY23, the previous fiscal year. So just a quick recap here. Highest expenses were concentrated in IT at about 49%, or $3.3 million. And the good thing is that we managed to keep virtually all of the Salesforce development spending within the $2.9 million that was left over from FY22. The second highest expense, of course, being payroll at 44%, or $2.9 million, and we had ended fiscal 23 with exactly 31 employees. Next slide, please. Now, going into FY24, we just finished the first quarter, so July, August, and September. About 17% of our budget has already been spent, so we are very early on at this point. If you actually look here, the green column represents our budget for the FY24 fiscal year, and then, of course, the three orange columns are the expenditures. Those total up to about $1.45 million. So that's about 17% of the budget. But if you also add in about $750,000 in approximate commitments or contracts that we have signed, that gets us to about $2.2 million, or about 26% through the budget. So we're actually about where we should be monetary wise. All in all, I think what mostly you can take from this chart is that because it's still early, we do have a long way to go. Next slide, please. Just a HR update. We did post 6 new positions, which are currently up. We have received quite a few resumes so far for the technical, for the IT program analyst, data analyst, and the compliance agent. Not as much so for the attorney positions, but that's to be expected in the current climate. We just took down 2 positions for intake coordinators, and we are now reviewing over 150 resumes that came in there, and we'll be setting up interviews. And I'm happy to report that those two intake coordinator positions, when they do come in, they will be supervised by Laura Martin, who we just recently promoted to a senior intake coordinator. There is more detail in your packet with the org chart that you can see. Next slide, please. And then finally, just a glimpse into FY25. I know it seems early that we're talking about that, but beginning with prior year spending plans, which we just implemented last month, the next phase in the state's budget cycle is maintenance and then cuts and expansions. And the maintenance and cuts and expansions, those combined really becomes the governor's budget or governor's recommendation, which is in January or to be filed in January. Similar to last year, we will be sort of filing a evolving budget. Again, we are not fully operational. There still are a number of statutory things that we have not gotten to yet. So we still have a little bit of ways to go. This is to be expected, though. We knew that it would take about 3 to 5 years to get to a fully operational status. So we will be the numbers that we will be submitting to A&F for inclusion in the governor's budget will be sort of showing that we are still indeed growing. I'll have more detail on those numbers at the next commission meeting. This week, I'll be meeting with Enrique and Commissioner Ellison to go over the numbers for moving into FY25.
There's
Commissioner.
Commissioner.
Yeah, so I just wanted to just make sure as we're considering hiring practices that we're being intentional about hiring and looking at and considering diverse candidates. As we look at as our agency gets larger, I want to make sure that's always at the forefront and that we're considering that. So I don't know how we do that or how you've considered doing that, but I want to just make sure that I note that.
Thank you, Commissioner. We actually we do indeed do that. As a matter of fact, the recruitment efforts that we recently put in place for the positions that were recently posted were done through I believe it's in Affinity app, or if it's a diversity application through the Mass Lawyers Weekly, or it's the Boston Bar Association. I figured off the top of my head, which so we actually do recruitment through those particular channels.
Eric.
Yes, Madam Chair.
I'm sure I should know the answer to this, but what exactly is an intake coordinator?
Sure. The intake coordinator is the person who is receiving the complaints that come in, complaints that are made through the general public to general public about police officers, alleged complaints, that is.
Thank you.
And they also deal with, Madam Chair, with complaints that come through the portal and will come through the portal from agencies. So these are positions within the Division of Standards to look at, triage, ensure that they're documented and properly followed up on as the Division of Standards looks through which complaints they may or may not investigate. Commissioner Bluestone, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I just want to echo Commissioner Luma's point, because I think it's really such an important point, and would just ask that in addition to the places where we do our recruitment, that we're attending to diversity on the teams of people who make decisions about hiring.
Will do, Commissioner. And I meant to mention that we can come back next, either next meeting or in future meetings periodically to report the actual results of our own, diversity composition, because that's also an important metric to be reporting to commissioners. I think that that concludes the ED report portion. I can take additional questions if there's any, or turn it over to Chair Hinkle.
I just wanted to comment just quickly on behalf of the commission, being the treasurer. I wanted to thank Eric and his team, as well as yourself, Enrique, on keeping me informed. The time that I spend with him in person and through back and forth, I can only imagine the work that goes into this, these lengthy reports. I usually leave there with a headache, but a better understanding of how the money is being spent. So I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of the commissioners.
And let me also echo the thanks, Enrique, for you and all of those who have worked on the report that you've given us today. We know that there's been an extraordinary amount of time and attention by the staff in addressing the issues that you've addressed, and we're very grateful for that. And I think unless there are additional questions, we can move on to item number 4 on our agenda, which is a legal update. I turn to our general counsel, Randall Ravitz, please.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen. Okay. This is a presentation regarding a topic that came up at the last commission meeting, where we promised to come back with a proposal that the commission could consider and vote on if it finds it to be acceptable. And that concerns voluntary relinquishments of certification. And here are the reasons to consider such a policy. And again, this is based largely on what was discussed at the last meeting. The commission's regulations on databases and dissemination of information provide that the public database shall not make available to members of the general public information concerning any individual who's no longer serving as an officer and who last received a certification more than 3 years earlier, but has not been decertified. So in other words, other than people who have been decertified, who will always be in the public database, if somebody has left law enforcement, their information can come out, but not until it's been 3 years since they last received a certification, during which time the current certification that they have is still active and they could rejoin another department. Now, there's a general exception that applies to all those exclusions in the regulations, and that is that the public database could be designed to allow particular individuals to access certain forms of information that ordinarily would be excluded. And part of the reason that's in there is because there are certain statutes that exclude certain information generally from the public. They say agencies can't disclose it, but they can disclose it to certain people, such as people in law enforcement, such as crime victims, for example. So that builds in a way for our own databases when we get to that point technologically to possibly be designed that way so that some people might have special access. Now, the regulations balance various considerations the way that they're designed now. On one hand, a person who leaves law enforcement has become a private citizen. This was a comment that was made at a prior commission meeting, that those who have become private citizens should have the ability to not see their information online. But on the other hand, if that person received a certification within the last 3 years, as I said, they still possess that certification and they could use it to seek a new law enforcement position. And some members of the public might still be interested in such a person's record, even if they've left law enforcement. So it's intended to balance those things. But as was discussed at the last commission meeting, there may be some people who would prefer to relinquish that ability to return to law enforcement in the future in return for having their disciplinary information removed from the general public database at an earlier point. Also, even separate and apart from any issues involving the publication of disciplinary information, the commission might want to allow for a relinquishment of certification as a way of resolving certain disciplinary or certification matters. So as a way of settling those matters. And so those factors warrant consideration of a policy that would provide for a voluntary relinquishment, but also allow for the removal of information from the database where appropriate, but not necessarily requiring it or making it automatic in all cases. So what would be the authority to allow for voluntary relinquishment? Well, perhaps the easiest way to answer that is through the language in Section 3A of Chapter 6E that provides that the Commission shall have all powers necessary or convenient to carry out and effectuate its purposes, including but not limited to the power to limit, condition, or restrict certifications and to enter into agreements or transactions with a person. I skipped over the words revoke or suspend specifically because given that the statute has separate sections that deal with those and that revoke is synonymous with decertify, really what we're talking about here doesn't seem to fit within those categories. It's more limiting, conditioning, or restricting. And the commission has reserved the ability to exercise all those powers in its various regulations regarding certification. Now, what is the authority to remove disciplinary information at an earlier point in time than it otherwise would happen? Well, the regulations provide that the public database shall not make available to members of the general public information concerning a complaint or disciplinary matter that the commission, by a vote of the commissioners, has decided not to make available to members of the general public. Again, with that exception that special access for certain people may be allowed. So what is the authority for less formal resolutions of adjudicatory matters, the kind of use of a voluntary relinquishment for settlement purposes that I mentioned? Well, the commission adjudicatory proceedings are subject to the Administrative Procedures Act, which Chapter 30A of the general laws. And that's very clear from several sources. And that act provides that in conducting adjudicatory proceedings, agencies shall afford all parties an opportunity for a full and fair hearing, but unless otherwise provided by any law, they can make informal disposition by stipulation, agreed settlement, consent order, or default, or limit the issues heard if the parties agree to it. And another reason why I highlight that is because I think it answers another question that's come up in other meetings about the commission's authority to enter into those types of agreements. So now the policy that's been drafted, which again is just for the commission's consideration, but it's included in the packet that was distributed. That proceeds as follows. Section A provides definitions just to prevent confusion. Section B states this general rule that one would be able to apply to the commission to voluntarily relinquish a certification. Section C then talks about the application form. And it says that it would begin by outlining the benefits to an applicant, saying that that the commission may decide upon voluntary relinquishment to remove the person's disciplinary information from that general public database. And if the commission attaches any conditions to that, it will afford the person an opportunity to withdraw the application until after they've gotten notice of those conditions and the ability to consider whether that changes their mind. And then the application form would also explain the sacrifices, the limitations, what somebody would be giving up. And all of this is consistent with existing authority. The person would be unable to be an officer for an agency, to execute arrests, to execute police powers. Their disciplinary information would still be included in the commission's internal databases. We wouldn't completely delete it. It could be available, as I said, to individuals who have that special access. And it could be provided in response to other requests like public records requests, if that's appropriate. And so this would just make sure people were aware of that. And then it would also provide, and this is significant, that the commission could still pursue disciplinary action based on conduct that the person engaged in while they were serving. So in other words, if they're relinquishing their certification, it would not be a way to escape the consequences of conduct that they engaged in while they were serving that the commission ordinarily would be able to pursue disciplinary action for. Section D of the draft policy provides that an application form would also require the applicant to provide certain forms of information on any criminal, civil, or disciplinary matters, so that we have the full picture before deciding that they would expressly acknowledge these sacrifices that I mentioned, the things they're giving up, and they would sign it under the pains and penalties of perjury. Then Section E says what the executive director or a designee would do with this application. First, it would be circulated among the commission's divisions so people could weigh in on any information they might have that might bear on whether the application should be allowed. Then we would review information in criminal, civil, and disciplinary records, the National Decertification Index, commission databases, again, to make sure that this is the right decision to make. And if the application is sufficient, the commission would be asked to vote on it and to vote on whether to attach any conditions upon, again, giving the applicant notice of them and an opportunity to withdraw the application. And then finally, Section F states that the commissioners reserve the ability to rescind or amend the policy. Now, so what are some arguments for such a policy? And these are things I've alluded to already. One argument is that an individual should have the ability to leave this law enforcement system if and when they so choose. Another argument is that once they do leave it, they are private citizens and they should be avoided having to see their sensitive information about them publicized. Another argument is that those who were automatically certified under the 2020 Act basically they got this certification without applying for it. So they didn't seek certification. They didn't know what the database would look like when they first became certified. But then there are arguments against such a policy. One is that a former officer's record could still be relevant to a criminal case or to an employer who's considering that person for a position outside law enforcement. Another argument is that the records of former officers generally could still be of interest to those who are looking at individual agencies and how their officers have performed, who are looking for patterns across agencies, who are developing public policies, or who are conducting other forms of research where they want to study and get as much information as possible about officers' backgrounds. And then in response to that point about those who are automatically certified under the 2020 Act, fact is they were on notice through the Act that there would be some form of public database, and they had 6 months after the Act was enacted to leave the system if they wanted to. And most of those people at this point have actually applied for recertification, so they've essentially opted into this general system that we have of post-commission regulation. So with that, I will stop sharing, and if the chair would like me to, I can entertain any questions. And if the commission finds this policy satisfactory, we would ask that or suggest that it vote on it today.
Randy, I don't think I see any commissioner, I'm sorry, Commissioner Kazarosian.
Sorry, thank you. I just want to make sure I understand a couple of things on this. One, my understanding is that if an officer does voluntarily resign, and the information is no longer going to be up on the database for whatever reason, it's still available in response to a public records request. Am I understanding that correctly?
Right, right. This would not affect that one way or another.
It's still a public record for whatever this now in private citizen law enforcement officer did or was engaged in or whatever happened during their tenure as law enforcement officer, correct?
Right. I mean, assuming it fits within the definition of public record and so forth, yes.
Okay. And as we've talked about before, I think even Larry Ellison talked about it in one of the earlier issues. Sometimes things are not always reported equally or properly, maybe. What are the consequences if an officer who is voluntarily resigning and going through the application and filling out the information, what happens if it's determined at a later date that they were not truthful? And how do we police that to use, no
right.
It's the same. I mean, it just seems to me that it's hard to, if an officer is voluntarily resigning, and let's just assume for a minute it's to avoid discipline or to minimize the process of the discipline. It seems that like Division of Standards would have to be involved to do an investigation as far as the information on the application. Or am I assuming too much? In order to ensure that it's correct and it's trustworthy or, verified.
Right. Well, two things. One, the way the policy is structured, it would call for the application to be circulated to all divisions. So with the idea that they would basically look into their own records, they would share any information that they have about this officer that might bear on whether this application should be allowed. And then also these records would be collected, criminal, civil, disciplinary matters, again, the NDI, our own records, and we would look for anything that might bear on the issue. But let's say the person does lie. Again, the policy would allow for disciplinary action to be taken against the person. I mean, the way it's worded right now, it says while they're serving. Maybe it could say while they're serving or certified. But the point is, if they lie to the commission, then under our statute, that's untruthfulness, and that could lead to disciplinary action. So we could take disciplinary action against them for lying on the application. Essentially, what's that?
Isn't the horse already out of the barn if they've now resigned? They're no longer a law enforcement officer. What would possibly be the disciplinary action that's going to affect a law enforcement officer who has effectively resigned? We've okayed it, and then we find out after the fact that they weren't truthful for whatever extent they weren't truthful.
Yeah. Well, if they're then decertified, and look, this could be reframed in such a way as to, harmonize these two things better, so that maybe we're not referring to it as a complete relinquishment, we're referring to it as something else. But if we then took disciplinary action against them and it resulted in a decertification, then their name would be put in the NDI, and they would not only continue to be banned from a law enforcement position, which already they were agreeing to do, but they would also be prohibited from working in any civilian capacity for any law enforcement agency, or from a sheriff's office, or from any department of EOPS in any capacity, again, if they were decertified. Beyond that, yeah, the types of discipline are limited, but I think that's always going to be the case with somebody who is willing to give up their work in law enforcement, that the consequences then are a lot more limited.
Well, and that leads me to my last question or point, which is they're giving up their right to work in law enforcement in Massachusetts, but that doesn't affect their ability to go down to Arizona and apply there. And that's another thing that concerns me is if someone, because we're not decertifying them, we're specifically, if they resign and they meet all the criteria in the application, we're not decertifying, they don't go on the registry, they cannot serve as a law enforcement officer anywhere in the Commonwealth, but they can go elsewhere. And that's a concern to me as well.
Yeah. I think, so there's language in there about attaching conditions to it. And you could attach a condition that their name will be entered in the NDI, which from what I understand, and somebody can correct me if they have a different understanding, can be done even if it's not, the disposition is not actually decertification, even if it's something other than that. Now, again, the person would be given, under this policy, would be given the option to then withdraw their application if that's going to happen. That might change their mind. And also that might be the kind of thing that you would say, all right, where we're doing this as a way of settling something, some disciplinary matter that we would otherwise be pursuing, we'll do that with that case. But in the case of some officer who has a perfectly clean record and just wants to be done with the whole thing, you might not take that approach with that officer. So that's why a lot of it is left open-ended.
Is it possible to revisit? I mean, I don't know whatever, and I'll be quiet after this, but to sort of revisit some of these issues and reword them. Okay. Okay, done.
Sure. As far as I'm concerned, sure. Can talk more.
Yeah. Randy, I think Commissioner Baker has a question as well.
Yes, just very quickly. I don't know if this just got further going. We're not talking about taking decertified officers off the list, correct? If you're decertified, you're decertified.
Right.
I didn't think that was even part of this conversation. If you're decertified, that's it, you're decertified. This was a conversation about whether the officer retires, but his or her name's on a public portal, and they say, hey, I have no interest in being a law enforcement officer, take my name off the list. That's what this conversation is about, right?
Yes. Yes.
I'm not looking to basically eliminate somebody that we deem should be decertified and then say, let's act like that never happened. I just want to make sure that's not the conversation.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
And that's already in that regulation that I started with, and that's consistent with the statute. Statute says decertifications basically always get published.
Gotcha. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on it.
Commissioner Talley?
I just want to make sure I'm clear in my understanding that if an officer is decertified, my understanding is that he or she cannot be appointed or employed as a law enforcement officer in Mass, but not only Mass, but anywhere else. Is that correct?
Kind of. The information is submitted to the National Decertification Index, and then the statute provides that we are supposed to work with other jurisdictions to ensure that that person doesn't get hired elsewhere. Ultimately, though, it would be up to those jurisdictions to decide.
Okay, thank you.
And Commissioner Ellison, did you have a question?
Unrelated to this, I just want to know, Randy, quickly, if you know, are there any updates on the constables situation?
No, honestly, I mean, it's not that we haven't had discussions. It's just nothing significant to report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So based on, I'm sorry, Commissioner Hall, I think I see your hand in the.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm gonna agree with Commissioner Kazarosian that we kind of hold this item to vote on so we can have more clarity around the language that is being used, because I too think I was confused that once officer is decertified, they're automatically, even in Massachusetts, put in a national database. So if that is not true, I would love to have more discussion around that.
Any other questions or comments from the commissioners? Then I think based on the discussion that has occurred and the affirmative nods from both our executive director and our general counsel, we will address this again at another meeting, subject to the discussion that has occurred here and the questions and the comments. Correct, Randy?
Yes, sounds fine.
Thank you. And then moving on, Randy, do you want to? Sorry.
The next item on the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. This will be very brief. It's just an update on some other regulatory action that's taken place. And these are things that were previewed at the last commission meeting. Regarding 555 CMR 1, which concerns complaints and how they're reported to agencies and how they're processed by agencies, and then our own adjudicatory processes. We made some corrections to typos and things like that. The corrected version was published and became effective on September 29th. We requested some corrections that for whatever reason didn't make it into that version, and so we requested them again. Something similar with respect to 555 CMR 2, which provides general rules of construction regarding all our regulations. Corrected version was published and became effective on September 29th. Then the regulations at 555 CMR 9, which concern initial certifications and certifications of independently applying officers, so self-sponsored officers. Those new regulations that the commission approved were published, and they became effective on September 29th. And then in the guidance regarding those regulations, we removed the word promulgation pending. And I point that out because someone had raised a question about that outside the commission. So both the regulations and the guidance are in full effect, and the current versions of all these documents have been placed on the commission's website.
Thank you, Randy. I think with that, we move on the agenda to any matter not anticipated by the chair at the time of posting. I don't think that there are any. And before we address the moving into executive session, I wonder, Enrique, if you could just explain to the members of the public, should they have any questions about any matter that we've addressed today, what the procedure would be for them to address those questions to the commission.
Yes, Madam Chair, they can just submit questions via information in our website, the general mailbox. We monitor it constantly. Post c-comments at mass.gov. We also have our Director of Communications always ready to answer questions. And where particular individuals have questions about matters that they would like to see in future meetings, we can, of course, consider them for future meetings.
Thank you very much. Again, thank all of the members of the staff for all the hard work that they've put into the matters that have been addressed by us today. And then I will at this time address the issue of moving into executive session in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 38, Sections 21A5, in anticipation of discussion regarding the investigation of charges of criminal misconduct, also under Chapter 38, Section 21A7, combined with General Laws, Chapter 6E, Section 8C2, and to the extent they may be applicable, Chapter 6, Sections 168 and 178, in anticipation of discussion regarding the initiation of preliminary inquiries and initial staff review related to the same and regarding certain criminal offender record information, and Chapter 30A, Sections 21A7, combined with Chapter 30A, Sections 22F and G, in anticipation of discussion and approval of the minutes of our prior executive sessions. And that addresses certain matters set forth in the agenda with regard to what will be addressed in the executive session. Is there a motion to go into executive session and adjourn the public meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second to that motion?
A second.
Commissioner Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Bluestone,
Yes.
Mr. Calderon,
Yes.
Mr. Ellison,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Kajrosian,
Yes.
Mr. Luma,
Yes.
Mr. Talley.
Yes.
I also approve. It's unanimously carried. To members of the public, we will not reconvene the public meeting after the executive session occurs. And I think with that, unless there are any other issues, Commissioner Ellison, did you have a question?
No, not at all. Just adjusting the screen. Sorry.
Thank you. Anything further? And I think with that, the public meeting is adjourned. Thanks again to members of the public who have attended the meeting. And we will reconvene into executive session. Commissioners, can we say in approximately 5 minutes? Take just a brief chance for the chair to have another cup of coffee. Thank you.